Hello, and welcome to Solving for the Undefined podcast. I'm your host, Johanna, founder of Miss Kuiper's Classroom, the place that equips teachers and parents in helping students struggling with on-grade level math. But it's not always about the numbers, and that's why I'm here, bringing you the formulas to solve your problems, math and otherwise, and helping students gain confidence in academic abilities. And that's what you can count on. Hello, welcome to a brand new episode. And can you believe it's already May? That is blowing my mind. Thinking where we were last year to where we are today and how much has changed, not only just in the world, but how we run things in our classroom and how school just looks different. I started hybrid a couple weeks ago, and it has been a crazy, fun experience. Being back in the classroom for hybrid teaching and learning has really showed me how much I was burnt out on teaching online. And while there are definite perks to teaching online, meaning like wearing sweatpants every day, if I had to skip a shower, no one would know, stuff like that. Definitely perks to being online. But being back in person, seeing my students' faces, interacting with them has been huge. But one thing I have noticed being back in the classroom is how much I miss the mute all button. I know it's kind of a funny thing to miss, but being able to eliminate completely the classroom management portion of teaching has been kind of nice. And being back in person has reignited the fun little quirks that all students have that lead to some classroom issues. And this past week, I posted a reel or TikTok. Whether you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, feel free to follow me at Miss Kuiper. That's Kuiper. I shared a reel/TikTok talking about 3 strategies I use in my classroom to get all students working. And you all had some really good questions and wonderings in response to the video that I posted. So I am here to share a more in-depth view of 3 of the strategies I use in my class to get all of my students working. The first strategy was providing an extremely specific to-do list. In previous episodes, I referred to this as exit directions, but I know that term exit directions can be kind of confusing because the directions aren't about students exiting the room. They're about students exiting from the teaching portion into the working portion. And so I changed it up a little bit to call it a to-do list instead, just to eliminate some of that confusion. So when I say a to-do list, I mean the exit directions you might have heard me previously talk about. In the exit directions, I include what the students are doing, and typically I try to be as specific as possible. So the example in the video for the what to do, I said, work to solve the systems of equations. Now, that's not super specific, but I paired it with a visual of what the activity looked like. So I had a yellow arrow, bright, poppin' yellow arrow pointing to a picture of the mystery puzzle my students were working on. This combined with the words, work to solve the systems of equations, allows students to be able to double check, am I doing the right activity right now? Because they have a visual representation of what it should look like. The second thing I include with my to-do list is a how to do it. And this isn't like a step-by-step instruction on how to complete the activity, but how to do it within the classroom. In the example, I said collaborate with a partner. So they know that they are supposed to be working with a partner to complete this activity. If it's an assessment or something I want students to do on their own, I'll say work on your own. And in my classroom, I have voice levels. And I have like a little slidey board where it has like a level 1 to a level 4. I actually got it from the Target dollar bin, which is super sweet. I'll include a picture of it in the show notes on my website. So if you head to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast, you can find the episode and then therefore a picture of what the voice level chart looks like. But if I want students to work on their own, typically I'll put on your own level 0. if it's a truly independent process. Or if I want students to work on their own, but they can check in with their partner, I might put it at a level 1, which is a whisper. But I always pair it with a visual of either students collaborating or students just sitting at a desk. And you can see what I mean in the picture. I'll also post it in the show notes. But you'll see two people turning to talk to each other with a little word bubble above their head. Again, showing collaborating, talking with a partner. I'll also include any extra materials they can use. So like a calculator or a Chromebook or a workbook, math book, ruler, any extra materials that they don't normally use, or I just want to remind them, hey, use this if you need it. You can also probably label it on your to-do list instead of how to do it as materials needed or some other term to describe how they're supposed to complete the activity. The third thing I always put on there is a where to do it. And this can be either where to do it like physically in your classroom or more abstractly like what website or what platform. So in the example, I said at your desk showing your work on a whiteboard, telling students that while they're doing the activity online, I want them to be at their desk rather than moving around the room and showing their work on their whiteboard. So they don't have to do it in their notebook or turn in any work, but they are doing it on a whiteboard. I actually use my desktops as whiteboards because they are such a smooth surface, and because of COVID, I have to clean them anyway. So it just makes sense to allow students to do that rather than me having to sanitize whiteboards as well as their desks. It just makes my life easier. And before we get to the juicy pro tip, I want to share that I always put a timer with this kind of to-do list, because then it gives the students a visual of how long they have to do the activity. For this particular activity that I showed, it was a 20-minute activity. If it's a warm-up problem, I give students 2 to 3 minutes depending on the length. And I find a timer helpful for students to know how much time has elapsed since they started and how much time they have remaining to work on the activity. One thing I'll do as I'm circulating the classroom, helping students, pausing, seeing how everyone's doing, checking the temperature of the room. Temperature meaning the vibes, how people are doing. Are they feeling confident? Are they feeling like they're struggling? Along those points. I will kind of share out how much time is left. I'll do this maybe like 2 or 3 times, not excessively. Like, all right, we have 12 minutes and 30 seconds. All right, 12 minutes and 29 seconds. Not like that. But if there's a 20-minute timer and there's 10 minutes left, we'll be like, 10 more minutes. And I find if you say it in a sing-songy voice, it kind of breaks the chatter among the students because typically other students aren't being sing-songy while they're working. So it kind of breaks through the normal tone in the room. I also had someone ask how to embed a timer into slides. So I will be posting a video Monday, May 3rd. I will post a video on how I embed those timers into my slides. So that way it's easy access, one-stop shop to-do list. Now for the juicy part. My pro tip. Put what students should do when they're done. In this section, I include what students should do with the activity. So whether it's submit it on Google Classroom or Canvas, whether it's to put it in their binder, put it in the turn-in folder, etc. What they should do with the activity, and then what to do after they do the activity. It saves you so much time answering the exact same question over and over. What do we do when they're done? So I always put what they do with the activity when they're done, and then what to do next. Again, I like to play with that visuals because it allows students to glance over the words to see a logo or a symbol. So I wanted students to submit their activity on Canvas. So I put the Canvas logo. It kind of stands out from the rest of the to-do list, making their eyes drawn to it. I had someone comment on my TikTok asking what age level I would see this working for. And I think it can work for any grade level, but you just have to adapt it. The one where I've been talking about so far, using words and the example you'll see in the video, I think that really works well for middle school and high school. You could probably get away with it upper elementary, but I would say the younger you go, the less words you want to use and the more visuals you want to use. An example, if your second grade students are doing a reading activity, put a picture of the book and put a visual of a student reading a book. Even better if you have a visual of a student reading that specific book. But getting the idea like, oh, there's a book, I have that book, oh, that person's reading, I should be reading too. Giving a visual example of what students should be doing. And then if you want students to free seat, put the different examples of the different seats you have in your class. So if you have beanbag chairs, and I have no idea what kind of chairs free seating looks like in elementary schools, but put pictures of those to show, like, you get to choose between these kinds of seats. Go. I would also put a timer on there so students have a visual of like how long they are doing an activity, especially for younger grades because their concept of time might be a little different than older students. That is my detailed explanation of to-do list / exit directions for your classroom. Now, my second strategy was tied in with the first strategy of point back to your to-do list when a student asks, what are we doing? Because then it creates an independent learner rather than someone who's dependent on you. Because if they can get away with asking you every time, what are we doing? And you verbally answer, oh, we're working on this page, doing this, your to-do list is no longer valid in their mind. They can just ask you instead of having to search for it themselves. I also have a very specific way of pointing back to the exit directions, and there's psychology behind that, and I'll give you a brief overview. So if a student asks, what are we doing? Typically, I'm standing right by their desk when they ask that. So I'll take a hand and I'll kind of put it from their eye level and point to the board. And I do this with an open palm, with the palm facing what I want them to look at. In the video, I kind of give a demonstration of it. So I'm just turning and my eyes go with my hands. That's huge because your students will look where your eyes look. You can practice this, test it on your students. If you are looking at their desk or looking at them and you point to something with an open palm or even incorrectly with a finger, the finger's just like more accusatory than it is like helpful. So I always find the open palm facing away is good. And this comes from the Strategies of Envoy by Michael Grinder. You can find resources on my website for more information about that. But open palm facing away. And if you're looking at the student, they probably won't look to your hand. But if you follow your hand with your eyes and bring them over to the exit directions, they will look there. And if they're like, huh? Be like, look at number 1 or look at what to do. And if they're still not grasping it, be like, what does the first one say? And then have them verbally tell you what it says to do. And then respond, does that make sense? And if a student responds to the, does that make sense with a no, ask them what doesn't make sense. So that way you can kind of get at the issue of what the student is struggling with to understand. But my goal in my classroom is to create independent learners and independent humans. So if I'm constantly giving them verbal directions when I have it non-verbally somewhere else, I am creating dependent people, not independent people. Keep that in mind as you use this to-do list in your classroom. And this last strategy that I gave is my new favorite thing. I listen to a lot of books using Audible. It's my favorite way to learn and read books because I have no time. I could make time, but in my commute, I'd rather listen to a book or a podcast than music. I listened to Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. And it's about his career as an FBI negotiator and the tactics and strategies he's learned and how he applies them to business. So I took them and applied them to the classroom. That's where that last strategy I gave comes from. My last strategy was to use specific phrases like, it seems like you're struggling to get started. And the reason I use that is because it's like a nonchalant, oh, it looks like you're struggling to get started. It's not accusing the student of, hey, get started, you need to do your work. It's more of like, it looks like from an outside perspective, anyone could look and see this to be true. It seems like you're struggling to get started. Or if you don't like the struggling, you could say hesitant to get started. Either one of those would be fine. But it gives students the opportunity to refute that statement. Oh, no, I'm just reading, or yeah, I'm struggling, I don't understand the directions. It gives students an opportunity to ask you a question or communicate with you that isn't precedented by a question. I hope that makes sense. An important thing with using this statement is watch the inflection of your voice. The way you say it will make or break how a student reacts to it. You need to use a downward inflection. So I'll show you. Here is a non-downward inflection. It seems like you're struggling to get started. Don't do that. Here's the correct way. It seems like you're struggling to get started. Can you hear the difference? The first one kind of curved up into a question, and the other one curved down into a statement. The reason why it's important to do the downward is because it's more factual rather than questioning like, oh, is this true? When in reality, no, the student is struggling to get started and you are investigating why. I also think of this phrase as a nice way of prompting students to get started, because I have found that sometimes, like when I say, oh, you need to get to work, it's like the student is just thinking about it or is processing it. And so generalizing like, oh, if someone were to look at you, this statement would be true. You can also apply this to other situations, like if you're looking out at your students after giving the lesson and they kind of all have questioning faces, you can be like, it seems like you have a question. That way, prompting the students to be like, yeah, here's my question. Prompting students without asking them to give you extra information. It works wonders. Try it out and let me know, because this is my new favorite thing in the classroom. I'll also be sharing on my Instagram/TikTok this week other ways I've used Chris Voss's FBI negotiating tactics in my classroom to help students get started. It is phenomenal and life-changing, and it will be for you too. In summary, the 3 strategies I've shared to get your students working: provide an extremely specific to-do list for your students. And 2, when a student asks what to do, point to your list, minimize your voice as much as possible. Create that independent person. And lastly, use specific prompting phrases like, it seems like you're hesitant to get started, and watch your inflection. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode. Follow me on my Instagram and my brand new TikTok. You can find me at Miss Kuiper. That's MISSKUIPER. And I'm going to be sharing lots of tips and tricks of how I teach math in my classroom and help students become independent learners. Oh, and one last thing. This Monday, I have teamed up with a bunch of other math teachers on Instagram to give away 5 $50 gift cards to Teachers Pay Teachers. So if you head over to my Instagram, find my recent post, make sure you follow all the instructions on the post so you can be one of the lucky winners. All right, bye for real this time. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. To find all the links and resources to things talked about in this episode, head on over to MissKuipersClassroom.com and click on podcast.